Thank you for tuning in to the teaching ministry of Reverend Gillard S. Glover. Now stay tuned for a powerful message.
This evening we have gathered to celebrate Watch Night. In many African American churches, this Watch Night event commemorates the historical gathering of like-minded persons to watch and wait for an act of release and liberation. At the first Watch Night in 1863, like-minded persons watched and waited for President Lincoln's official enactment of the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863. This proclamation declared that slaves in those states rebelling against the Union must be free. On this Watch Night, like-minded persons have gathered collectively, waiting for release from the restraints imposed by a political system that values profit more than people. This night of worship celebrates historical freedom. This night of worship celebrates existential freedom. This night of worship acknowledges that waiting and watching, even for freedom, is a part of our cultural and spiritual history. As a people, we've always known that we have divinely been prepared for our destiny. Even in the pit of slavery, we knew that we were divinely destined for the palace. Sometimes on the way to a divinely promised palace, you have to wait in the pit of your predicament. In 2023, somebody here found themselves in the pits knowing full well that God had promised them a palace. Sometimes on the way to our divinely promised palace, we must wait in the pit of our predicament. Many of our holy heroes understood that sometimes on the way to your palace, you must wait in the pit. Moses understood that sometimes we must faithfully wait in the pit. At the age of 40, Moses found out that he was destined to be God's agent of liberation for a people he barely knew and did not love. This newfound awareness of his divine destiny caused him to kill an abusing overseer, take refuge in the wilderness. For 40 years he waited in what must have seemed to this Egyptian a pit of poverty, Midian, until God made him leader of his people. Yet he waited. David understood that sometimes we must faithfully wait in the pit until God places us in the palace. Around the age of 20, David was anointed by Samuel as king. But for 17 years, he had to hide from Saul in the caves of Philistia and lived as an enemy of Israel. Until at age 37, he was made ruler over all of Israel, yet he waited. Joseph understood that sometimes we must faithfully wait in the pit until God elevates to the palace. At Genesis 37, we're told that Joseph was given a dream of a fortuitous future at the tender age of 17. Joseph was told that his brothers and his parents would one day bow down before him. That was an extraordinary dream because it meant God would work outside the established rules of inheritance and redistribute power and prestige in a way never before contemplated by Jewish society. Literally, the last would be made first and the first would be made last. Joseph's brothers hated him for that dream, and they declared their hatred at verse 19 and 20 of chapter 37. Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came to them, they conspired to kill him. Then they said to one another, Look, the dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let's stop, let's kill him. Let's throw him in a pit, and we shall say some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what becomes of his dream. Like many of holy heroes, Joseph, the recipient of a grand dream from God, found himself in the pits when he knew he had been promised a palace. Briefly on this watch night, I want to preach about waiting in the pits on my way to the palace. Tell me, church, what do you do when you know God has promised you a palatial estate and you find yourself literally living in the pits? What do you do? when you know your finances are not what God promised? What do? When you know your collective community standing is not what God promised it would be? What do you do when your existential situation is different from your expectations as a blood-bought child of God? Like our four persons and our four parents that were declared free on the first watch night in 1863. Joseph shows us what you must do when you have been promised a palace, but you find yourself in the pit. You wait. Waiting is not a passive activity. It requires faithful adoration and service of God regardless of your existential situation. Sometimes you have to wait in captivity. Like our foreparents, Joseph had to literally wait in captivity. The text says that his brothers put him in a pit. They hated his dream of redistributed power so much until they decided to throw him in a pit. Bor is the Hebrew word, which in Hebrew refers to the underworld, hell. Literally, that's what happened to our foreparents in Africa. They were put into the hell of African slave trade by their own brothers. During the period of the West African slave trade, slavers who made a business out of capturing and selling slaves would travel deep into Africa to capture black men, women, and children. Sadly, the chief of these African tribes and villages would often sell members of their own tribe to these slavers. Once captured, the slaves were taken to terrible holding cells or pits, much like the one Joseph's brother put him in. Imagine one day you're living and loving your family, and the next day you've been put at the bottom of a hellhole by people you love and who profess to love you. That was Joseph's predicament. He had been placed at the bottom of a hellhole by brothers he loved and who professed to love him. Somebody in this place tonight knows what it's like to be placed in a pit by people who promise to protect you. What do you do when your kinfolk put you in a pit because you told them you are one of the king's kids? You wait on the Lord. Like our foreparents. Can you imagine Joseph's disillusionment when he found himself snatched from a free and favored position with the Father and put in an imprisoning pit? In the pit, Joseph was unable to move about. The pit was dank. The pit was dark. The pit was dismal. The pit was restraining, far different from the dream of unrestrained reality promised by the Father. Here he was, the recipient of God's divine promise, immobilized in the pit by his own brothers. He screamed for release, but his relatives would not help him. His fathers had 4 wives and 11 other sons, but none of them would help him. He called out to Leah's son, but Simeon would not help him. He called out to Bilhah's sons, but Dan would not help him. He called out to Zilpah's son, but Asher would not help him. But he had a dream from God. So in the midst of the pit, he refused to hold a pity party. He worshiped the Lord. He waited on the Lord. Like our foreparents, he cried out, "Father, I stretch my hand to thee. No other help I know. If I just can get to the Father, everything will be all right." Sometimes you have to wait even though you are being treated like a commodity. Not only did Joseph wait in captivity, he also waited when he was treated like a commodity, when he was thingified. The text tells us that not only did his brothers put him in a hellhole, they also converted him to an instrument of commerce. They sold him to Ishmaelite slave traders for 20 pieces of silver. The slave traders then carried him to Egypt in a caravan of contraband. For 30 days, Joseph traveled through the desert, chained hand and foot. He was treated like baggage. And once he arrived in Egypt, he was displayed and sold like merchandise. That sounds like the experience of our foreparents. They were chained in the holds of a slave ship and sent on more than a 30-day journey through the Middle Passage to port cities in the south. Approximately 11 million died because they were unable to withstand the stench and the stain of the pit. But those who knew how to wait on the Lord in the pit made it to these shores alive. Like Joseph, they were sustained by a dream, and even though they were in the pits at present, they knew that their children's children would make it to the palace one day. So in the pit, their leaders told them what our leaders told us. Hold on. We've got some difficult days ahead, but hold on. It really doesn't matter to me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind like anyone. I would like to live a long time. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go from this pit up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know that we as a people will get to the promised land. And so I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Sometimes you have to wait as a caretaker for capitalists. That's what Joseph became, a caretaker for capitalists. The word says that after Joseph was treated as a commodity, he was paraded like merchandise until he was sold to a rich man named Potiphar. Even though he was enslaved, the Lord blessed Joseph in all of his endeavors. And Potiphar put him in charge of everything in his household. Once Joseph was in charge, all of Potiphar's affairs began to run smoothly. With Joseph in the house, Potiphar did not have to worry about anything but what he wanted to eat. Joseph was waiting in the pit as a caretaker for a capitalist. But because he waited on the Lord while he was in the pit, the Lord blessed he and the capitalist. Does that sound familiar? For more than 400 years, our foreparents served as caretakers for the capitalists of this country. And because they waited on the Lord, both the capitalists and the caretakers were blessed. Houses are air-conditioned now because while waiting in the pit, Frederick Jones invented the air conditioning unit. Cars operate smoother now because while waiting in the pit, Richard Spikes invented the automatic gear shift. Blood transfusions are simpler now because while in the pit, Charles Drew invented the blood plasma. We are no longer limited to landline conversations now because while in the pit, Henry Sampson invented the cell phone. We can go from floor to floor in America's skyscrapers without using the stairs now because while in the pit, Alexander Mills invented the elevator. We can read in the dark now because while in the pit, Lewis Latimer invented the electric light bulb. We can get out of a burning multi-story building now because while in the pit, J.W. Winters invented the fire escape ladder. You can play 18 holes of golf now because while in the pit, T. Grant invented the golf tee. You can write your friends a letter now because while in the pit, John Love invented the pencil sharpener. William Purvis invented the fountain pen. Lee Barrage invented the typewriter, and Philip Downing invented the letter drop. Even while serving as caretakers for capitalists, the Lord blessed us because we waited on Him while we were in the pit. Now, church, because we waited in the pit for more than 400 years, the Lord took one of us out of the pit and put him in the presidential palace. Then He took one of us and made her the most powerful female executive in America because we waited in captivity, because we waited as a human commodity, because we waited as the caretakers for capitalists. The Lord is now rearranging the world's power structure. He's doing for us what He told Joseph He would do. He's altering the presumed order of things. He's making the last first and the first last. And I can't wait to see what's going to happen on that day, but I realize that I must wait. just like we're waiting tonight. Just as Joseph waited in the pit of his predicament until God got ready and elevated him to the palace. So I must wait. So we must wait until our change comes. The old preachers tell of a conversation between Joseph and an agitating onlooker as he traveled from the pit to the palace. They say when Joseph was put in the pit, they asked him, "Joseph, what are you doing?" And he replied, "I'm waiting." Out of the pit, they asked him, "Joseph, what are you doing?" And he replied, "I'm waiting." In the Ishmaelite slave caravan, they asked him, "Joseph, what are you doing?" And he replied, "I'm waiting." While serving as a caretaker for the capitalist Potiphar, they asked him, "Joseph, what are you doing?" And he replied, "I'm waiting." When he was running away from Potiphar's wife, they asked him, "Joseph, what in the world are you doing?" And he replied, "I'm waiting." When they put him in prison, they asked him, "Joseph, what are you doing?" And he replied, "I'm waiting." When his fellow prisoners forgot about him, they asked him, "Joseph, what are you doing?" And he replied, "I am waiting." When he interpreted Pharaoh's dream, they asked him once again, "Joseph, what are you doing?" He replied, "I am waiting." When he was made second in command over all of Egypt, they asked him, "Joseph, what are you doing?" And he replied, "I'm waiting." "Why are you waiting, Joseph?" "I am waiting because I know that they that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up on wings like eagles. They shall run and not get weary. They shall walk and not faint." They asked him, "Who are you waiting for?" And Joseph told them there was another one coming. He too was the Father's favorite. He too was wrapped in a special coat of many colors, representative of the many shades of humanity. He too would be put in the pit. He was put there on Friday. He stayed there on Saturday, but was raised by the Father early Sunday morning and taken to a palace prepared for him on high. He promised to come back, and so I'm watching, and so I'm waiting, because when he comes back, he will place me in the palace he has promised to every true believer. For didn't he say, "In my Father's house there are many mansions, and I go there now to prepare one just for you"? That's why I can wait in the pits. I know I'm on my way to the palace. That's why I can wait. Can you wait? When I can read my title clear to mansions in the sky, I'll bid farewell to every fear and wipe my weeping eyes. I'm going to trust in the Lord. That's why I can wait in the pits. I know I'm on my way to the palace. Amen.